What's happening, everybody? Well, I decided to take a deeper dive into this latest Dodge teaser video entitled Scream. And if you're not familiar with it, it shows the large ghoul yelling into this air machine, and displayed on the machine it reads 105 at 3.02 times 2.98 equals 1,582. Now, what do all those numbers mean? Well, to start off, you have to get a point of reference, and what they're referencing is actually found in the direct connection catalog. If you look up the C30 and the C170 crate engines, that'll give you the clues that you're looking for. First off, both of those engines utilize a 105 millimeter throttle body and a larger snout, and that's going to come into play a little bit later in the chat, so just remember that for future reference. But they also include that 3.02 upper pulley. Now, that 3.02 upper pulley is actually smaller than the one that comes with the Elephant crate engine, which is 3.17, and significantly smaller than the one that comes factory on the Hellcat and the Red Eye, which is 3.35. Now, what does that other number mean, that 2.98? Well, I believe that is the actual pulley drive ratio. You see, when you're looking at superchargers and boosts and everything else, what will determine how fast that supercharger is spinning is the difference between your crank pulley and your supercharger pulley. In this case, a crank pulley of 8 inches, which is factory on a Hellcat or a Red Eye, and the supercharger pulley, which is 3.35, gives you a 2.38 drive ratio. And that's consistent between the two setups. Now, if you were to have a 3.02 inch upper pulley with that same crank pulley, well, you'd only be looking at a ratio of 2.64. What I believe is that they're running a 10% larger crank pulley on that assembly to get it to a 2.98 pulley ratio. And let me tell you why I believe that. I'm going to work it through the numbers here, and this should start to make sense. I'm going to give you boost numbers, then I'm going to give you actual liters per minute, and that's going to give you that CFM number that we were talking about, that 1,582. That's a number that we are assuming is a CFM output of that 3-liter supercharger. So let me walk you through the boost numbers first. Actually, I'll tell you what, I'm going to reverse that. Let me give you the liters per minute, and then I'll tell you how that translates into boost, because I think that'll make a little bit more sense. So, a factory Hellcat supercharger, the 2.4 liter, generates roughly 30,000 liters per minute worth of airflow. Now, if you take that 30,000 liters of airflow and divide it by the size difference of 2.7 and 2.4, technically 2.38, but you get the idea, it's about a 12% margin difference. You come out now to a 34,090 CFM for that 2.7 liter supercharger at roughly the same pulley ratio, or actually in this case, the exact same pulley ratio. Now, hypothetically, if you added 10%, which is the difference between the 3 liter and the 2.7 liter, you'll get a number of 37,877 liters per minute. Now, what does all of that mean? Well, we're going to get to the CFM number in here in just a second, because when you look at now that 37,877 number, if you add 10% to the drive ratio, that now gets you to 42,086 CFM. Now, the equation to get the liters per minute out of, the CFM out of liters per minute, that's cubic feet per minute of airflow, you're going to divide your liters per minute by 28.317. Now, in this case, it gets you to a figure of 1,486 CFM. But you might say that's not 1,582 CFM. You're exactly right. But remember that larger throttle body and that larger snout we were talking about earlier. That could very easily give you another 100 CFM of airflow over the stock assembly for the Hellcat and the Red Eye, significantly smaller. And so now we are looking at roughly 1,582. And so with about a 10% or so larger housing than a stock red eye, you might see that 10% translate into the CFM. Now, how does that translate into boost? Well, a stock Hellcat is roughly 11 PSI. A red eye Demon, any of those variants is going to check in somewhere around 14.5 PSI. The hypothetical 10% larger supercharger with the same pulley drive ratio should check in around 16.1, and if you add the difference in the lower pulley, you would get around 18 PSI of boost. Remember that other video where they're talking about 7.1 density? Well, roughly 18 PSI minus roughly 11 PSI, and again, it depends on altitude and all of that when you're talking about actual output of the supercharger, but basically 18 minus 11 is 7 PSI, and that's basically what they were showing us, is that this setup that they're going to give us is making roughly 7 pounds more boost than the Hellcat originally made. It's going to have a 3-liter supercharger with a 3.02 upper pulley and a 10% larger lower pulley, making roughly 1,582 CFM. And if you take 1,582 CFM and you divide that by what is commonly referred to as a constant, in other words, what is the constant divider for CFM per horsepower for a certain engine configuration? For supercharged stuff, it's typically between 1.5 and 1.67, 1.7 in some cases. And if you divide 1,582 by a real easy 1.5, that's roughly 1,000 horsepower. And if you're being a little bit more conservative and you make that around 1.65, that gives you about 950 horsepower. So what they're telling you is that they've made some changes to the assembly in general, probably running on E85, 10% lower with a smaller upper pulley. It's going to make roughly somewhere around 1,000 horsepower. At least that's how the numbers add up. Post up your comments, though. Let me know what you think, and I'll get back to you on the next one. Y'all have a great one. Adios.